Well, ASEAN leaders are meeting with China, Japan, and South Korea today as regional diplomacy continues in Manila.
The ASEAN Plus 3 summit follows a series of high-level engagements this week, including talks among the Quad foreign ministers. They discuss maritime security and other regional issues before reaffirming their commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific in a joint statement. CNA's senior correspondent Leong Wai Kit has more from Metro Manila.
That broad strategic picture from ASEAN's point of view is that it can take heart, that it still has convening power, meaning they're able to attract countries, dialogue partners to come to the ASEAN table to not just have formal dialogues with ASEAN, but also create sideline conversations, corridor diplomacy, such as Quad, and as well as various bilateral meetings. In fact, one of those was a meeting between Japan and US, where they talked about Japan-China ties. Let's take a listen.
We understand what they're facing right now. They're facing, real restrictions, export controls and all sorts of things. And obviously you talked about some of the aggressive measures that have been taken. It's a troubling trend. I don't think that China-Japan relations are at their high point right now. We're very close to Japan. We have treaty obligations with Japan. We have deep history of cooperation with Japan, and that's going to continue.
Interestingly, about 10 years ago in 2017, Quad members had revived their regular meetings right here in Manila and also on the sidelines of an ASEAN meeting. Their common concerns still revolve around China's aggression, China's assertiveness on the maritime front. Of course, we know how China views Quad. China has used a language such as promoting Cold War mentality and bloc politics targeting third parties.
Well, Alan Bam is Senior Advisor for the International and Security Affairs Program at the Australia Institute, and he joins us now live from the Australian capital, Canberra. Alan, good to see you again. So Rubio and Wang walked out of their meeting with slightly different takes. Rubio talking about managing differences, while his Chinese counterpart's readout was on China's core interests and its sovereignty. So in the world of diplomacy, which you were very much a part of for many years, what do we make of the differences?
Well, the differences are real, they're substantial, and they are unresolved. The very fact that both the foreign ministers were talking, as it were, in parallel and not talking about the same thing just tell us that the differences are just unresolved and will not be resolved anytime soon.
We did notice that the sensitive issues like election interference and tariffs largely left out of the table. I mean, did you get a clearer sense of what we can actually expect from the Trump-Xi summit in September if it takes place?
Well, looking forward to the summit, and Rubio said that that's what they concentrated on, how they were going to conduct the President Xi visit to Washington. That will be an extremely important meeting. And my expectation is that President Trump will go out of his way to be very friendly and warm and talk about President Xi as a very close friend. In other words, the diplomatic style that President Trump brings to all of these top-level meetings. Whether they are able, though, to deal with the substance is an altogether different question. And my expectation is that there will be very little progress on substance while ever President Trump is so mercurial in the way in which he conducts business. So I think that the show will be good, but the underlying text of the drama will not be so good.
Alan, ASEAN's dialogue partners have been vocal about freedom of navigation. We have Australia saying the region has a choice to make. So, moving forward is hedging, and this is one part. The other part is consensus. Now, are they going to be more difficult for ASEAN as a bloc as tensions, rise in the South China Sea?
Look, I think they will be more difficult for ASEAN as a bloc, and I think that for two reasons. The factors causing the problems in the South China Sea are not of ASEAN's creation, and so ASEAN is, as it were, caught up in events rather than controlling them. And I think the second part of it is that at this point, you cannot expect that China is going to make very much in the way of concessions with respect to its claims in the South China Sea, and progress on the code of conduct is proving to be extremely slow. But I think the important thing to focus on here is, and this is a point that was made by your reporter in Manila, that ASEAN retains very considerable convening power. ASEAN is in some respects a model for how regional groups should get themselves involved in matters of global significance. And here, ASEAN, I think, is playing a very careful and very clever role in mediating its way between the United States and China. And for those who, in the West particularly, like to criticise ASEAN as a talk fest or something like that, I'd have to say that it is an extremely successful talk fest because it's been able to maintain its own peace and contribute to regional security for the best part of 60 years. That's a very great achievement.
To your point of the progress on South China Sea Code of Conduct being slow, despite the clash just days earlier, the Philippines and China reaffirmed their commitment to conclude that Code of Conduct this year. But when the confrontation is becoming more frequent, is that deadline still realistic?
Look, I don't think it is. While ever we've got people resorting to batons to conduct their conversations, it's pretty hard to think that they're going to come to an agreement that they need to sign with a pen. I think the negotiations will continue, and the role, again, as I say, that ASEAN will play here, I think, is very substantial, because China's diplomatic tactic, I think, is to maintain as constructive a relationship with ASEAN as a whole as it possibly can, because it is capitalising on America's relative withdrawal from engagement with Southeast Asia. And so for that reason alone, China, I think, will play a very careful hand in its negotiations with the Philippines, but I don't myself expect that there'll be a great amount of progress while ever the two sides are prepared to play a fairly assertive, indeed aggressive role between their coast guards in the South China Sea itself.
Okay, so what are the main challenges? It's 30 years in the making now. So any idea at all what it might eventually look like? You know, when? I'm hoping it's a when we get there.
Well, somebody's got to make a concession, I think, Arnold, and I can't see who is going to make the concession first. It's a pretty big issue for China because China has got a very extensive set of claims in the South China Sea, has not been conducive to international arbitration on those things, and so it has really stuck fast to its 12-dash line and all of that. For the Philippines, they've got economic and other issues at stake as well. So it's difficult for the Philippines to make concessions to China's power. And so while they are butting heads as they are, it's very difficult to see how real progress can be made. But we have to rely on the convening power of ASEAN to keep them talking to each other about a code of conduct, because it's a multilateral code, not just a bilateral one. Mm-hmm. So I think that ASEAN's negotiating role will continue to be of very great importance here.
And we are expecting the ASEAN Plus 3 meeting to take place later today. And it comes at a time when China and Japan ties are far from their best. How much will that limit cooperation, especially on trade and supply chain resilience?
It's a really good question, I think, Julie, and it's again, it's hard to read because China and Japan are both on the reflex side of Trump's frequent use of tariffs in one form or another, and other forms of sort of economic relationship management that the United States seems to like at this point. I think the way to look at the trilateral meeting is as something of a response to the United States, its diplomatic techniques, and also the fact that it's, as it were, vacating some of the space in Asia. China, Japan, and South Korea are not the closest of friends for reasons of history, not least of all. So the fact that they're conducting these discussions is, I think, of itself very significant because it is a response to American diplomacy that has got them to where they are. So I think we need to see it in broader global terms, as well as in terms of China manoeuvring to make sure that its position as the dominant power in Asia is both understood and recognised.
Alan, it's good to see you again. Thank you very much for that. Alan Bam is Senior Advisor at the Australia Institute.